Okay, so what we'll go over here, hopefully not too long, if everybody doesn't get too tired, is the heart of the sequence. So forget the alphabet for a minute, just looking at the sequence. If you have the 7 days of creation, if you look at what was made each day, there was darkness, and he said, "Let there be light." And then he separated water from water. And then he separated water from land and put seeds in the soil. Day 4, he put sun, moon, and stars in the sky. Day 5 is fish in the sea, birds in the air. Day 6 is animals and man. And then day 7, he rested. There's probably numerous different ways to read what else is going on in those days, which is another conversation we could have tomorrow, another day, looking at physics. At least the way I see, there's some interesting thing, quantum physics, in those descriptions, especially the first 3 days. But just looking at the narrative, if you look at the festivals, so in this section here, one line talks about the festivals, another line talks about what he made each day. So for example, the first festival is Passover. So some people have a different take on what the festivals are. If you look at Leviticus 23, there's an interesting way that it's written. This is maybe a little complicated, but at least I'll show you references to why I'm saying what I'm saying. It starts off, he talks about the Sabbath day. And then he said in verse 4, "These are the appointed festivals of Yahweh, the Mikra Kodesh, holy convocations, which you shall designate in their appropriate time. In the first month, on the 14th of the month in the afternoon, is the time of the Pesach offering." So, if this is the appointed festivals, he starts with Pesach. So Pesach is considered one appointed time. Festival isn't necessarily the best word, but Mikra Kodesh is the time and place to gather together, and Kodesh means it's his and it's designated. Then verse 6, "And on the 15th day of the month is the festival of matzah." So that's its own festival after that. "You shall eat matzah for a 7-day period." So here you have it first, one day on the 14th, and then is its own festival, 7 days. So the first one is an appointed time, and then the second one is its own festival. So there's 2 different events. One problem with seeing the pattern is that people say, well, the whole thing is unleavened bread, or they'll say the whole thing is Passover, because they're joined together. But if you see them as 2 separate things, verse 9, it starts off with saying, Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, okay, this is like a whole new subject. So if you look for the first verses between 4 and 8, he's talking about Pesach and then a 7-day festival. Then it says, Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, "Speak to the children of Israel." So this is a whole new category. And here he's talking about when you enter the land, you reap its harvest, bring in the omer. He shall wave the omer before Yahweh to gain favor for you. On the morrow of the rest day, the Kohen shall wave it. So this is where they cut a sheath, and they bring it to the priest, and he lifts it up, and he waves it before Yahweh. It's this ceremonial thing. On the day you wave the omer, you shall perform, and it tells you about the offerings. And then verse 19, you shall count for yourselves. So this is still the same subject. From the morrow of the rest day, from the day you bring the omer waving, 7 weeks. So he says, okay, here's this third festival. So the first one, Mikra Kodesh, is Pesach. The second one is unleavened bread. And now the third one, you bring this in and you start counting. He hasn't changed subject yet. He's still on the same subject. You read down, make the offering, so forth. Verse 20, the Kohen shall wave them. And he's still talking. Verse 22, when you reap the harvest land, don't remove completely. Okay, then he... verse 21, you shall convoke on this very day. That's the 50th day. He's talking about you shall make 1 he-goat as a sin offering, 2 lambs, feast peace offering, and he talks about with the bread, verse 18. So what I'm saying is that he says you wave the cut sheath, and then you count for the 50 days, and on the 50th day, you wave the bread and you have this other offering. It's all one concept. But literally what almost everybody says is that's 2 festivals. They'll say, oh, the first one is where you wave the sheath. Okay, that's the third festival. You count 50 days, and then they'll say the 4th festival of the year is you wave the 2 loaves. But if you read here, it's all one thought. And the proof of it, I'll show you right here. Verse 23, it starts off like he said a moment before, Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, speak to this children of Israel saying, okay, that's a whole other concept. But we didn't have that concept break at the previous festival. And then he talks about Yom Teruah. Then verse 26, Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, on the 10th day of the 7th month. So he starts over, Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, that's like a whole other concept. Now he's talking about Yom Teruah. Mm-hmm. Don't do any work, it's a day of complete rest. Verse 33, Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, okay, now it's talking about Sukkot. And he says it's a 7-day festival. Then verse 35, on the first day is a holy convocation. So that's the first day of Sukkot. You shall not do any laborious work. For a 7-day period you offer a fire offering. On the 8th day there will be a holy convocation. That's the Mikra Kodesh again. It's like, well, wait a minute. It's a 7-day festival. But on the 8th day, that's Shemini Atzeret. And you shall offer the fire offering to Yahweh. It's an assembly. Don't do any laborious work. These are the appointed festivals of Yahweh. Okay, let's look at that for a second. What we just read here is that at Pesach, there's 1 day and then 7. Oh, wow. Okay, that's 1 festival and the 2nd festival. Then there's 1 day where you wave the sheath, 50 days of counting, and then you raise up the 2 loaves and another offering. And I'm saying that's 1 festival that's 50 days long. And then Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, Yom Teruah. Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, Yom Kippur. Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, now you have a 7-day Sukkot, and the last day is 1 day, which is its own day, not part of Sukkot, but he calls it a Mikra Kodesh. Okay, so in the beginning, you have 1 day, then 7, and at the end, you have 7 days, then 1. It's the opposite, like bookends. Well, if you're counting 7 festivals, 7 appointed times, Passover, unleavened bread, Shavuot being a 50-day festival, and then that's 3, which would be in the spring, and then for the fall you've got Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Shemini Atzeret. That's 4. The only other person I know who counts this way is Todd Bennett. Everybody else says Pesach and unleavened bread, Shemini Atzeret is wave sheath, so that's 3 in the spring, and then you have waving the loaves, which is the 4th, Yom Teruah the 5th, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot is the last one, and they forget Shemini Atzeret. Yeah. It's not even counted as its own Mikra Kodesh. So you could say, so what? It's just no. It's like teeth in a key that you put in a door to open up the understanding. So the pattern that I'm telling you, where Shavuot is 50 days of counting, makes all the difference in the world. So here's why. If you compare it to the days of creation, we'll do that in a second. But if you also compare it to the Mishkan, so I'm calling this the Mishkan pattern, there's a word right here. The Mishkan pattern is in Exodus 25 to 27. And he was told, Moshe goes up into the Mount Sinai and he's shown a pattern. The pattern is this word, Tav, Bet, Nun, Yod, Tav, Tabanit. That's the word for pattern. Moshe is shown the pattern of the Mishkan up in heaven, and he said, Yahweh said, make sure that you make the Mishkan on earth according to the pattern. So the interesting thing about this word is that there's a Tav in the beginning and a Tav at the end, and the Bet Nun Yod word in between is Beneh, which is my children or my son. So you could read the word pattern as my son in the covenant. You understand that? If the Tav is the sign of the covenant, then there's these two letters Tav and the word my son. So my son in the covenant is the pattern. The idea here with this whole study of the letters is that the words are spelled what they are on purpose. They mean something. Every letter in the word makes a difference. And therefore, if you study the spelling of the word, there's another level of meaning or understanding just in the spelling of the word, such as that Tabanit. But here's the pattern of the Mishkan. These are the pictures right here. There was the fence, and then inside the fence is a barbecue grill, the altar of sacrifice, and then there's this laver. Now those were outside in the courtyard. Then there's a covered place. And in the covered place is three other things. There's a menorah, table of showbread, altar and incense, and then there's another covered place called the Kadosh Kodashim, and that has the Ark of the Covenant. So what I'm saying is that pattern lines up with the festivals, meaning there's 3 spring festivals, not 4. Shavuot is not 2 festivals, it's 1. So you have the big white fence lining up with Passover, the barbecue grill lining up with unleavened bread, and then the 50 days of counting lining up with the laver of water. That's outside in the courtyard in the open air of the tabernacle. Now, inside, you'll have the menorah lining up with Yom Teruah, table of showbread, which would line up with Yom Kippur, the altar of incense, which would line up with Sukkot, and then the final festival that everybody forgets, lining up with the Ark of the Covenant. So the way to double check this is comparing them to the days of creation. So it starts off in the darkness. He said it was darkness before he said let there be light. The Mishkan was out in the middle of the wilderness. So figure that's like the darkness out in the woods somewhere, out in the wilderness. And then there was this big white fence, white linen fence set up. Now according to Andrew Hoy of the 314 Project, it was probably round, and that's a whole other matter. This isn't to dispute that, but we're just looking at a model. So, the big white fence in the midst of the darkness, and remember there's a pillar of fire that was above it at night, so the big white fence was probably glowing like a lampshade, you might figure. So, if he's on day 1 of creation, there was darkness, and he said, let there be light. That's a picture of this big white glowing fence in the middle of the wilderness. Now, at Passover, he said, you guys have been in the bondage of Egypt and slavery. That's like being in the darkness. And he said, paint blood on the doorposts. I'm going to release you from Egypt and call you to myself. You're going to be my people. That's as distinctive as saying, let there be light in the darkness. As distinctive of the Mishkan in the midst of the wilderness. Mm-hmm. The thing about the word Mishkan, so you've heard of the word Shekinah?
Yeah.
Have you heard that? No?
Shekinah.
The glory of God?
Yes, people call it the glory because
Shekinah.
Shekinah. I've heard some people say, oh, that's the name of the Holy Spirit. It's a female name, Shekinah. Listen, the word Shekin means to be neighborly. Okay, so this word here, we're Shekin-ing together. The place that you Shekin is the letter M in front of it, which would be Mishkan. The Mishkan is translated in Greek as taverno, and the B and the V is the same word, so that's where you get tabernacle. It's also where you get the word tavern. So the tavern, like the pub, is where you go to hang out with your friends. Drink beer, shoot pool, talk, whatever. It's the same word as Mishkan. It's nothing sacred. So you could say, well, Shekinah, that's sacred. When Yahweh was shaken, like shacking up, that's an English slur for when two people cohabit together.
A shack.
Shack. A shack is a place where you hang out together. Same thing. So shacking or shacking up is when two people live in the same place. The point is, for Yahweh, when His presence comes down and He's there in some form of visible expression, you've got this heavy weight or this cloud or something, that's the Shekinah glory. It doesn't mean it's the name of the feminine name of the Holy Spirit. Now you could say, well, anytime He who is ethereal and spirit and beyond manifestation, if He shows up and there's some kind of manifestation, by default definition, that's the Holy Spirit. Well, that's where people come up with that. I don't agree that that's what it means, that it's the female Holy Spirit's name, but when you lose context of what the words mean, you end up with stuff like that. So make of it what you will. The point is, for His presence to be with His people is what Pesach was all about. He says, you guys have been, remember He told Abraham, it's going to be 430 years. Not that they were slaves 430 years, but they were strangers in the land not their own. And then He says, okay, today's the day. And He reaches in and He pulls them out of Egypt and calls them His own. That's just like saying, let there be light. So thematically, Passover is like day one, which is like this big glowing white fence in the middle of the desert. And just another qualification, the first beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The darkness is like those in poverty of spirit, where they're depressed, they're dejected, things aren't going right, they keep getting ripped off, they feel lost, they feel defeated. And then Yahweh says, if you feel that way and you want me, if you want my kingdom, welcome. But if somebody says, hey, I'm rich and happy, I don't need to worry about the kingdom of any God or the kingdom of Yahweh, I'm just going to be on my own. Well, then they're happy being in the darkness, and they have no reason to be compelled to turn to the kingdom of heaven. So that's where that concept of the blessing of the beatitude matches it. Day 2, which is right on the heels of Pesach, He said, eat unleavened bread for a week. Well, bread is bread. And when you separate leaven from unleavened, the only thing is this invisible leavening agent. I mean, maybe you could shake some powder in there, but it's really, you can pick it up in the air. What I'm saying, it's thematically just like the second day of creation. Separating water from water and putting this firmament, this barrier between the upper and the lower. Water looks like water, so He's separating and says, this is above and this is below. In the Mishkan, there's a barbecue grill. What do you do on a grill? A grill separates things. So they take the lamb, the sacrifice that somebody would bring in, and first they separate the life from the lamb. It's kind of an invisible thing, but now you have a dead body instead of a living lamb. And then they take off the skin from the lamb, and then they take out the guts of the lamb, and then they separate this and that from the lamb and put it on the barbecue grill, and some things drip through and some things stay here. I'm saying that's basically the same as saying, well, go to the Beatitudes. Blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And you could say, well, if the model is coming into the Mishkan, why should somebody mourn? If you think about that, you say, listen, if you've been out in the darkness, and suddenly you get to come into, and you see the kingdom, from the inside view, rather than just from the outside seeing a big white fence, 2 reasons to mourn. One, you see the truth and you realize how much time you wasted, that you could have been operating in the truth for success. And the other, you might realize how much stuff you've been doing wrong on the outside and wasting your life and messing everything up because you didn't know any better. But blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. That's a picture of him giving us his Torah when we first come in from the outside. It was right inside the fence, just like unleavened bread is right after Passover. When you stepped inside the fence, he didn't say it was way up there that you came in and you walked and you brought your stuff to the altar. It says in the description in Exodus, it's right inside the fence. It's like you open the gate and it's right there in front of you. Then he said the laver was halfway between the barbecue grill and the covered place. It's like it's a little bit of a distance. So on day 3, now we ignore the waters above for the rest of the description of the week. He takes the waters below and he separates it from the soil and the water. And then he said he spoke forth putting plants in the soil. However, so you see pictures on day 3 of creation of all these plants growing. The problem is, if you go to Genesis 2, it says nothing had planted yet. Nothing had grown yet because there's no man to water. It hadn't rained. Well, if he put plants in the soil on day 2 and nothing had sprouted yet, they must have been seeds. Seeds are this little nucleus of potential that has DNA of each one of the plants. So if the third thing in the Mishkan is this laver of water, the laver was made out of the mirrors of the women. So it's this thing which is like this reflection of yourself, a bowl of water like a womb that has seeds put in it. Just like on day 3, the soil had seeds put in it. The third festival is Shavuot. The first day of cutting the seed heads and lifting it up, the grain, is basically a picture of conception. And then the 7 weeks of counting is a pregnancy. And then the birthday is Pentecost, which is Shavuot, which is basically the same model as counting 7 sevens of years, 49, and then Jubilee, Yovel, is like this release from your captivity. Just so happens, we'll get to the numbers in a minute, but Mem is 40, and there's 40 weeks of human gestation, and Nun is 50, like the word Yovel or Jubilee, or the birthday. So what I'm saying is that Mem and Nun is this time of pregnancy, which is another validation that it's one festival, not 2. Conception, counting, and birthing. And if you change that, the pattern's not going to line up with the letters the same way. That's the spring feast. And this is where the beatitude is, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. You can say, well, what does that have to do? Well, that was the day he first talks about the earth. That's number 1. And number 2, meek has to do with, it's not the proud and the arrogant, but the one that's of humble of heart, and the one who is carrying over the seed planted within him, you might say. So he gives us the Torah on day 2, because we entered his kingdom, day 1, let there be light. And here it's a matter of the one who's tending the seed placed within them as a responsibility. Just to compare the letters, Zion is cut off, Het is a fence, so there's this barrier. Between the 2 letters, there's a barrier. That's like the distinction between the dark and let there be light. Het, Tet, and Yod, as we talked earlier here, it's like here's the wall of the kingdom, the sign of the kingdom, whose kingdom it is, and this hand of power that holds and possesses those who are his own. All 3 of the letters Het, Tet, and Yod, which is why they're all in blue, is a picture of Yahweh saying, this Pesach is me taking you out of the other place, bringing it here, putting my stamp on you and saying you belong to mine. You belong to myself. Then he teaches us his instructions, which is Torah, which is in this purple. That's Kaf and Lamed. Lamed means teach and learn. Kaf is this open hand. So he says, here, now that I've taken you for myself, this is what I'm going to give you in this open hand. When Moshe said, show me your glory, he put him in the cleft of the rock and he put his hand over him. And then he pulls his hand off and lets him see him pass by. What I'm saying, there's these themes of understanding, of teaching with the open hand. And Lamed means teach and learn. So that lines up with this. And then this being red, this is purple like royal decrees. And red, the word Dalet Mem, Dam is red, Adam is red, it's blood. So this speaks of birthing and humanity, meaning the flesh, the blood in your muscles. So what I'm saying is, if this is blue, because it's his authority of whose kingdom it is, and this is purple, royal decrees, and this is red, having to do with pregnation and birthing, those are the three embroidery colors that he talks about in that order in the Mishkan. And on the high priest's clothing, it was blue, purple, red, white linen. So to put these as white linen, linen speaks of cleanliness, purity, righteousness. So you could say, well, if those represent the spring feasts, and these are the fall feasts, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shemini Atzeret, then you've got this pattern, blue, purple, red, with white linen. So the first one was Yom Teruah. The first thing inside that he talks about is the menorah. The shape of the menorah looks quite a bit like the Samech. That's the day he put sun, moon, and stars in the sky. What's that have to do with the menorah? In Revelation, Yeshua is talking about walking amidst the candlesticks. Or maybe it's one menorah with the branches of the candlesticks. And of course you have the Shemesh, the serpent candle in the middle. Then you've got 3 branches and 3 branches. And he talks about if you don't bear good fruit, he'll break off the branches, cut them off, and throw them into the fire. So the concept of arranging responsibilities like the stars are arranged in the sky is a matter of principalities and job descriptions. The sun rules the day, the moon rules the night. Again, it's a model type of saying, once you choose to come into the kingdom by choosing life, you learn the instructions of the Torah, you take it to heart within you and nurture the proper attitude, and then he gives you the job description when you come of age to be given the responsibility to be doing the stuff he said to do, which lines up with the menorah, like you are placed like one of the branches and told to bear good fruit, lining up with the Samech. So then we talked about day 5, I understand where the fruit is evaluated and tested. So even the letter ayin that looks like an eyeball also looks like a fruit. It's round, it's got the dot in the center. The word ayin means weigh, measure, balance exactly, look carefully to. The table of showbread, you could say, well, showbread, what does that got to do with ayin? Lining up with the festival of Yom Kippur is Judgment Day. Scales of balance is how you judge. So you put something into weigh and measure is how you judge it. And the way the table was arranged, you had 6 piles of loaves here and 6 loaves over here. It almost looks like you can balance things out. And the word, it was panim, which is the word for faces, is also the word for lechem. So it's panim lechem, I believe is what it's phrased. Panim is the type of bread, face, and if you were to wear different masks, as it were, like different faces. We were talking earlier about, some people drink a little much and they start showing who they really are. So the masks come off. But this is the day that all the masks get evaluated. Yom Kippur, your true self. You're supposed to introspect and contemplate and say, gosh, what have I been doing? How can I do better? How can I, present myself before Him? So the notion that this table of faces, balancing things out, and whether you're found atoned for or not, day 5 was fish and birds. So kind of like the fish in the sea and the birds in the air, a tipping of scales. Kind of sort of like a picture of heaven and hell. However you want to see that model, those who are acceptable rise up and go to heaven when they die, as it were, and those who aren't are thrown into the lake of fire and are into the depth of destruction forever. So I'm saying these are model types. And that's where he said for the Beatitude, blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. So here, balanced scales. The word is mishpat, judgment, balanced scales. And this is the day where mishpat is played out based on the fruit you've been bearing, samik, as you are doing what he said to do. Pei is a mouth which eats the fruit, partakes of it, and you could say, well, Pei is the festival of Sukkot. As we mentioned earlier, a mouth, things of the mouth. Eating, drinking, talking, praying, singing, laughing. It's all living together. So on day 6, he made those people that dwell on the land. All the various animals, all the various people groups, and people groups think of each other as different types of animals. Even sports teams have different animal mascots. What I'm saying is that the Pei, the mouth, the Sukkot, is all about the hanging out together. Good night.
Night.
Altar of incense, the article in the Mishkan there's another place where it says the prayers of the saints are like incense to him. So again, I'm just trying to show you thematic parallels. Then you have the most set apart place. So just like Shemini Atzeret, this opposite bookend, all by itself, the Kadosh Kodashim, Holy of Holies, set apart all by itself. The seventh-day Sabbath, pushed aside all by itself. You have the letter Zadi lining up with the Ark of the Covenant, all by itself, lining up with Shemini Atzeret. So in the embroidery, you had blue, purple, red threads, white linen, and so the Samik Ayin Pei. Remember in the song, Samik Ayin Pei, Shema, Shemer, together one. Here, guard, together, we all work together to do this thing. That's really where the righteousness of the saints of the Kodashim is evident. White linen is doing what you do in purity and in righteousness. And the archetypal model of that is the letter Zadi, which is a picture of the Mashiach, the Messiah. And so when Yeshua was put into the tomb, 1, 2, 3 days and 3 nights, and then he rose, the letter Zadi is a picture of a sprout coming back to life. Like the gold threads. That's why this row here is gold, a thin gold line. So I see blue, purple, red, white as the equivalent of Yod, He, Vav, He. Because Yod, the hand that works, is like, I'm the creator. Well, that speaks of his authority. It's his kingdom. Yod, He, the expression, the revealing of the hand of the creator is the Torah. That's the purple, the royal decrees. The Vav, the man, the connection, the Messiah, red. And then the second He, the Ruach, who leads us as we Shema Shomer together in the ways of righteousness like white linen. So Yod, He, Vav, He, blue, purple, red, white, I see that as his name in color. So when I make Zitziot that's blue, purple, red, white, or if I have a flag that has colors blue, purple, red, white, I see that as Yod, He, Vav, He, because it's how you interpret what the colors are according to this theme. And then on top of the Ark of the Covenant, when his Shekinah was present, there was this, either there was just this weighty kavod, or there was this pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, fire as a pillar is kind of like this tornado vortex spinning around of burning flame, and then the smoke billows like these clouds. So you kind of have this model of the pillar of fire like an exclamation point. Like this, and at the bottom, the ball of the exclamation point is the Ark of the Covenant. And clouds billowing is kind of like this big question mark. So the combination of a exclamation point and question mark, it's like, what do you say? Look right here, inside the Ark of the Covenant. So in that letter Kuf, R-Q, you got this round thing like the question mark, and then you've got this boom, straight. So the Q is a circle and a straight line. The Kuf is a circle and a straight line. Question mark is like a cloud. Exclamation point like a straight line. So I see what's called an interrobang. Like interrogatory, that's questioning, and the bang is boom, that's the exclamation point. The combination of those two symbols lines up with the letter Kuf, which looks like the pillar of fire and pillar of smoke over the Ark of the Covenant. So the pillar of fire goes from the ground level, where the Ark of the Covenant is, up into the sky and up into the clouds. Well, that's a picture of Yeshua raising from the dead, ascending up into the heavens, and as we said earlier in the song, Him coming back. So the model type fits, with the letter Kuf being His presence here, Yahweh in the pillar of fire, or with His kavod, and Him leaving, but Him returning. He left because we betrayed the covenant. He said He'll come back when we choose to come back to the covenant, which is the stuff at the bottom of the question mark, like, huh? What stuff do we have to do? This stuff, inside the Ark of the Covenant. Those commandments, the 10 commandments. And again, as Gillian was saying earlier when we were having this conversation, it's not, boy, let's check off, did we do each one of these 10? It's His heart, which is in the Aleph through Tav. So if we study Aleph Tav, that's the whole thing. And if we have a checklist, we'll notice, hey, yeah, we're already doing those things. And none of them are obnoxious and obtrusive. None of them are burdensome. It's just His ways, His heart, His mind, His being, which if we're achad with Him, that's our ways and heart. So if there's anything that He finds offensive, we would be finding it offensive as well. And then Resh Shin Tav, why this is in the white here, and this is in the white there, is that these first 5 letters is Him approaching down to do this, and this is Him in the future coming back, which is, interestingly enough, the word spelled Resh Shin Tav, Rashat, means net, trap, or snare. In other words, you go out and gather up, like you go to the grocery store, put everything you want in the grocery bag and bring it home. The letter Kuf is also shaped like a sickle, like you were talking about harvesting with a sickle. So if you go out and you harvest your stuff, and you take it with you, that's what Resh Shin Tav means. That's what Kuf Resh Shin Tav means. So here is Yahweh's approach to us, Aleph through Hey. Here is Him gathering up His own and taking them home with Him. And even the word spelled Aleph, Resh Shin Tav, is the word for betrothed, or the one that you're married to, or taking that one which you're betrothed to and taking it home. So that's a picture of Yeshua saying, I go to prepare a place for you in my Father's house, and then I'm going to go prepare a place, and I'm going to come back and gather you to myself and take you with me. That's what these letters are saying in Hebrew. Again, calibrating all these to the letter spaces, if you were to say that this is 2 festivals, putting 4 in the fall and only 3, putting 4 in the spring and 3 in the fall, they're going to line up differently. And I know there's other teachers that calculate it that way. And they have something to say and they make it look they look like it matches. It fits differently. If you have a key and a whole bunch of doors, the key might indeed open a door, but it's going to be a different door. And whatever's behind that door, whatever opens behind the door with this key, fits the alphabet, fits the identity of Yeshua being the Messiah, and somebody else could maybe teach the other way, which is fine, but I'm trying to show you that it all lines up. So by this model of the Mishkan, You've got the festivals, you've got the articles of the Mishkan, you've got the 7 days of creation, and then in here I have the Beatitudes, and then the next one here is the Lord's Prayer, how that follows in. There's another list here of who doesn't get in the book of Revelation, and then there's a few other things here. There's like 10 different ways that this pattern lines up. I did a presentation excuse me, back in 2004 about this, where there's 70 different patterns. This is 10. I have a writing showing 70, the first ones I found, and it was after that I found a few hundred more places in Scripture where this pattern holds up. Now you have to stretch your mind a little bit on some of them, but it looks like it's there, and it was after that that I found that it correlated to the alphabet. Here's the significance. Some people might question whether this alphabet is designed by Yahweh or designed by humans. What's the proof? Yahweh declared his identity by saying more than once, I am the maker of heaven and earth. When he says, this is what I did, and he gives us 6 days and resting on the seventh day is the sign that he is the guy who made this place, then that means the pattern is exclusively his. For the pattern to line up with these letters makes the letters also exclusively his. He then in Leviticus 23 says, these are my Moedim, which I'm giving to you. They're not Jewish holidays. They're Yahweh's Moedim. The Jews just happen to be the only ones that have preserved them, kept them, and handed them to us now, thousands of years later. Thank you, Brother Yehuda. But he said they're his, which means if we join him, they belong to us as well. But when he says they're his, the word moed, just briefly, mem, vav, ayin, dalet, moed, and then if you add im, yod, mem, that's this plural suffix. This word here, ayin, dalet, ed, is a witness, is a testimony. It also is a treasure. It means choice and best. It also means that which is removable. So this means the place of, or the object of, the instrument of. So when Yahweh says he gives us a moed, translated as festival, it's the tool or the place of the testimony and witness. So in other words, Yahweh is saying he gave us these 7 moedim to testify of his identity, which means the moedim are his. And if the moedim line up with the 7 days, lines up with the Mishkan, lines up with the alphabet, then the alphabet itself is a testimony of his DNA, as it were, as you would. When he says, make the pattern of the Mishkan, tabanit, pattern, my son, in the covenant, in between the two tavs, benate, ha, benate. The pattern is my son wrapped up in the covenant. You can say, oh, well that's Yeshua. Sure. But it's also Israel. He also said Ephraim is his firstborn son. That tells me that Ephraim better conform to this pattern. That Israel is given the privilege of knowing Yahweh's ways, the things that bear witness of him. And that Yeshua is the epitome, model, archetype, icon, quintessential Israel man. Therefore, if he himself has to embody these things, why would he have his Spirit lead his church to remove the festivals and remove the Sabbath day and blend it with pagan sun god and fertility goddess worship? It makes no sense. It can't be. It just can't be. Therefore, the true Mashiach is Yeshua by default, without even any reasoning or explanation. Yeshua must be the embodiment of these 22 letters. These 22 letters, because Chet, Tet, and Yod line up with Pesach and let there be light and the big white fence. Kaf, Lamed with the Torah of the barbecue grill. where we bring in our own offerings. Yes, Yeshua, the Vav man put to the Zion, like the red heifer sacrifice, outside the fence, takes us who have been wallowing with death and destruction, reveling in the carnality of nothingness. You go, huh, what? Gee, too bad. Like it says in Jeremiah 31, Ephraim slaps his thigh, darn it, what have I been doing? And he turns like the repentant prodigal son, and he comes back. So Yeshua, being put to the crucifixion outside the fence, brings us all back. And when we come in, it's us sacrificing ourselves on the altar of sacrifice here by learning his Torah, and so separating between leaven and unleavened. Leaven, the pure things of Yahweh's mouth, not mixed with human traditions and other pagan festivals, but purely what did Yahweh say. And we throw the other stuff away the way you'd separate a sacrificial lamb as an offering. And then we take it to heart, impregnated with his seed. And then we bear fruit as a part of his vine, grafted into the root of which the vine, which is Yeshua, the root, which is Yahuwah, and bearing fruit, which is the fruits of the Ruach, which are love, joy, peace, gentleness, kindness, self-control. There was a list of, I think, 7 of them, or 9 of them. Anyway, the point is, it's in Galatians 5:22. And then the fruit is inspected. He says, whatever you do is going to come back. Whatever fruit you bear, it's going to plant a new crop. So you better do the right thing. You better check each other's fruit, which is exactly what Jim was saying earlier in the day. The fellowship together. Prayers of the saints. Relating to him. Like the altar of incense. And then the set-apart day, which is the hope set before us. There will be a resurrection. I believe it speaks of 2 things. Not only a resurrection after we're dead, like Yeshua raising from the dead, but the resurrection of his favor upon us nationally. Because of the 12 tribes coming back to their senses and saying, let's do what Yahweh said to do. So the Zadi speaks of both the temporal and the afterward. There's 5 Sophite letters. Kaf, Memnun, and Pei Zadi. The word Sophite means at the end. Those 5 capital letters, as it were, in Hebrew show up only in the modern, not in the Paleo, but they show up at the end of a word. So it's kind of like there's a message speaking about at the end of time, at the end of our life. Yeshua's ministry was primarily about not only telling us to return to the Torah like every other prophet did, but uniquely his message was telling us about the kingdom of heaven. What would happen if we did what he said? Well, it's unto eternal life. I don't see any of the other prophets telling the people to consider eternal life, but Yeshua certainly did. So these are like these Sophite letters. We talked about this earlier. The open mem is closed, but these other 4 letters that were closed with a bottom on them are now open. So what's the message there? This is the teaching of eternal life. He said it's when he was speaking to Nicodemus in John chapter 3, not by the will of the flesh, but by the will of the Spirit, like a virgin birth. So we're born unto eternity like a virgin birth with a closed mem. Mem Sophite. Nun unto eternity, the Torah, the instructions unto eternity. And then Pei, which remember, that's like Sukkot. So not only his words which endure unto eternity, but the fellowship of the Kodashim unto eternity. And Zadi is a picture of the Kadosh Kodashim. You can see the first version is almost like a picture of a person on his knees like this in reverence before him. And the second one, like unto eternity, is a picture like standing here, like standing in his presence in front of the throne unto eternity. I see the message of the Sophites to be the syllabus of the Messiah, and the message in the regular alphabet to be the identity of the Messiah. And if anybody wants to squabble whether it's Jesus or Yeshua, I take it personally that Jesus is the fictional name of the fictional guy who changed everything and made it Christian. Yeah. Whereas Yeshua is the real human being who embodied the 22 letters of the alphabet, telling us to keep the Torah as a way of honoring his Father and our Father. his Elohim and our Elohim, which is Yod He Vav He. And that's who Yeshua is.
Amen.
Therefore, if all this stuff lines up with Yahweh's personal identity and personal message to his personal people, then he had to be the guy that invented the alphabet. There's no other way it could happen. Because in Genesis 2, at the very beginning, it says, after all the creation of Genesis 1, it says, thus everything in heaven and earth was completed, and all its array. That means all the details. So then, 1,500 years later or so, when Moshe is invited up to the mountain, and he's shown the pattern of the Mishkan, then that Mishkan pattern he saw had to have been completed by week 1. So the Mishkan he saw pre-existed humanity, pre-existed Moshe, pre-existed Israel, pre-existed the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which some people say Moshe was copying when he came up with the Hebrew alphabet, or the Mishkan pattern, or anything about the teachings of Yod He Vav He. It can't be so, because Yahweh said he finished the array of everything in heaven the first week. And if the first week says on day 4, I'm going to put sun, moon, and stars in the sky, like the Psalmic, he had already determined it would be lined up with the menorah, which would be in the covered place after the fence, the barbecue grill, and the laver. Days 1, 2, and 3. It's all synchronized, which is proof that the alphabet is Yahweh's personal design, which means it was planned and figured out before the stars were put in the sky. So if you want to study archaeology, this is the most ancient artifact. It's older than the universe.
Ooh. That's a
I
statement.
have a comment.
Yes.
It says in the New Testament, I think it's Paul, it says that the Messiah was crucified before the foundation of the world.
Because it was planned. There's Vav Zion.
That's it.
And here's the resurrection,
That's
Zadi.
it. So I see this alphabet being the covenant that the Father gave to the
50
Son.
years ago.
This is how it's going to happen.
There you go.
There you go. And the Son trusted,
Garbage.
and
It saved a lot of grief.
that's the story.
That's right. That's why Paul could say that. So I'm convinced that Paul must have known this, because there it is.
And it's from the
Wow.
Holy Spirit.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.